The gavel cracked like a gunshot in the stale, silent air of the courtroom. A sound meant to signal order, but in this moment, it felt like the final, sickening slam of a cell door. Judge Harold Whitmore's lips were a thin, pale line of absolute verdict, his eyes cold and dismissive behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He had just eviscerated the defense of the man standing before him, a defense built on truth, on fact, on the simple, desperate plea of an innocent man, and he had done it with a smirk on one side of the room. Two police officers sat, their uniforms crisp, their postures relaxed. A barely concealed look of victory passed between them. They had won. Again, and on the other side, stood a man broken by the very system sworn to protect him. Marcus Thorne. A man whose only crime was the color of his skin on a rainy Tuesday night. His shoulders, once proud and strong, were slumped under the weight of a humiliation so profound it felt physical. He could feel the eyes of the few spectators burning into his back, a mixture of pity and scorn. This was it. This was the moment where hope died. Where the machine of injustice grinds another good man into dust, another statistic, another hashtag. But what Judge Whitmore didn't know, what the smirking officers celebrating their easy victory couldn't possibly comprehend, was that this was not the end. This was the calm before the storm. Because the man they had so carelessly tried to destroy was not who they thought he was. And the moment of his revelation was ticking closer, a time bomb of truth set to explode in that very courtroom and shatter every assumption, every prejudice, every ounce of their unearned power. To understand the earthquake, you must first see the fault lines. And they ran through the life of Marcus Thorne like deep, historical scars. Marcus wasn't just a man, he was a testament to resilience. He grew up in a neighborhood where hope was a currency few could afford. He'd seen the way the world worked from the passenger seat of his father's old sedan, learning the unspoken rules during the talk, not about birds and bees, but about keeping his hands visible, his voice calm, his compliance absolute if ever those flashing red and blue lights appeared behind him. His father's eyes, weary with a lifetime of such lessons, had imprinted a permanent caution on his soul, but Marcus chose a different path. He consumed books like they were lifelines, his intellect a sharpened tool he was determined to use. He worked 2 jobs through college, the sting of his classmates' assumptions that he was there on a scholarship for anything but his merit fueling his fire. He wasn't angry, he was focused. He carried himself with a quiet dignity, a conscious effort to be seen not as a threat, but as a man. He navigated the corporate world, mastering the art of code switching, smoothing the edges of his speech to fit into boardrooms where he was often the only one who looked like him, his reward for all that hard work, all that careful navigation? A beautiful home in a quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood. A sanctuary. It was a symbol of his escape, a testament to his belief that if you worked hard and played by the rules would eventually work for you. That illusion shattered on a rain-slicked night. He was returning from a late night at the office, his mind buzzing with the details of a major federal case he was prosecuting. As the lead U.S. attorney for the district, a position he had earned through relentless dedication, the weight of justice was literally on his shoulders. He was tired, dreaming of his bed, his posture perhaps a little too weary, his movements a little too slow as he fumbled for his keys at his own front door. The porch light was out. A simple burnt bulb he hadn't had time to replace. In the dim glow of a distant street lamp, his dark skin became a canvas for fear and assumption. The police cruiser had been rolling slowly down the street, its occupants bored, looking for anything out of the ordinary. And to them, a black man in a suit, hesitating at the door of a large house in this neighborhood, was the very definition of ordinary. Their suspicion was immediate, visceral. They didn't see a homeowner. They didn't see a weary professional. They saw a stereotype. A narrative they had been conditioned to believe. The confrontation was swift. The commands barked, harsh and metallic in the peaceful night. Show your hands. Step away from the door. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, not with guilt, but with a familiar, generational dread. He moved with deliberate slowness, his father's voice echoing in his head. Do what they say, son. Just come home safe. He tried to explain. Officers, this is my house. My wallet is inside with my ID. His voice, usually so commanding in a courtroom, was measured, placating. It didn't matter. His calmness was read as defiance. His explanations as excuses. They saw his expensive suit as stolen finery, his weary confidence as arrogance. They never asked for his ID. They never ran his name. They simply escalated, their voices growing louder, more aggressive. When he reached into his breast pocket for his phone to show them a picture of his family in front of the very house, one officer saw a sudden movement, a potential weapon. It was all the justification they needed. He was slammed against the wet front door, the cold wood pressing into his face. The hard, impersonal click of handcuffs cutting into his wrists. He was rid his rights on his own porch, under the light of the home he owned, as his neighbor's curtains twitched. The humiliation was an acid wash, burning away the persona of the successful attorney and leaving behind the raw, vulnerable black boy his father had tried to protect. They didn't arrest a criminal that night. They arrested an idea, the idea that he could ever truly belong. The ride to the station was a silent, rolling nightmare. Marcus sat in the hard plastic back seat of the squad car, the cage separating him from the officers a perfect metaphor for the divide he could never cross. He could hear their conversation, casual and laced with a dark humor. Thought he was a big shot, huh? One muttered. They all think they're big shots until they're in cuffs, the other chuckled. At the precinct, the process was dehumanizing. The booking officer, a woman with tired eyes and a practiced indifference, took his information without looking up. When he stated his address, her fingers paused over the keyboard. She glanced at the arresting officers, a silent question in her eyes. One of them gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. She shrugged and typed on. The doubt was systemic, a silent agreement among them that his story was impossible. He was fingerprinted, his hands rolled in ink as if he were a common thief. He was photographed, a mugshot that would capture the profound shame and anger in his eyes, a permanent record of a lie. He was placed in a cold, concrete holding cell with a few other disheveled men. The air smelled of sweat, despair, and antiseptic. He leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor, his head in his hands. The U.S. attorney who had put violent criminals behind bars was now sitting in their place. The irony was a bitter pill he could barely swallow. He used his one phone call not for a lawyer, but for his second-in-command, Anna. Her sleepy hello was met with his strained, quiet voice. Anna. It's Marcus. I've been arrested. The silence on the other end was deafening. I'm at the 12th precinct. I need you to do two things. First, get me the best defense attorney we have on retainer. And second, do not reveal my title to anyone. Marcus, what are you talking about? Why? Anna's voice was laced with confusion and panic. Just do it, Anna. Please. I need to see how this plays out. He hung up, the weight of his decision settling on him. This was no longer about a simple mistaken identity. This was an experiment. A horrific and voluntary test of the very justice system he had dedicated his life to upholding. His lawyer, a sharp, formidable woman named Evelyn Reed, arrived within the hour. Her expression was a mask of professional fury. She had his release papers within minutes, the charges, resisting arrest and trespassing, ludicrously flimsy up against his impeccable record and ownership documents. The officers who arrested him were visibly annoyed as they processed his release. Their narrative was being challenged, and they didn't like it, but Marcus wasn't seeking release. He was seeking justice. He instructed Evelyn to reject any deal, any offer to expunge the record quietly. He was going to fight the charges in court. He was going to force them to stand by their lie in front of a judge. The weeks leading to the trial were a masterclass in psychological warfare. The prosecution, representing the police department, offered a steady drip of insinuation. They painted Marcus as an arrogant professional who had overreacted to a routine check, a man too proud to cooperate. They suggested his wealth and status had made him believe he was above the law. They were carefully crafting a narrative where the police were the vigilant heroes, and he was the entitled villain. Marcus's own team uncovered the truth. The police report was a work of fiction, peppered with phrases like furtive movements, agitated behavior, and failed to comply with clear commands. It completely omitted his attempts to identify himself. They found that the two officers had a history of complaints, all from Black and Hispanic men, all settled internally with no disciplinary action. The system was protecting its own, closing ranks around a shared bias. The morning of the trial, Marcus dressed not in the powerful, expensive suit of a federal attorney, but in a simple, conservative jacket and slacks. He wanted to look like any other Black man facing the system. He wanted the judge to see only what those officers had seen that night. He walked into the courtroom not as a prosecutor, but as a defendant, and felt the immense gulf between those two roles. The air was different. The presumption was different. He was guilty until proven innocent. Judge Harold Whitmore presided like a bored king. He was a man in his late 60s, with a reputation for being no-nonsense and a staunch supporter of law enforcement. He barely looked at Marcus, instead offering polite, almost friendly nods to the prosecuting attorney and the officers on the stand. The officers testified. They were polished, confident. They spoke in a practiced jargon of perceived threats and officer safety. They portrayed Marcus as a looming, aggressive figure. They said he had become belligerent, that he had refused to identify himself. Their lies were smooth, delivered with the confidence of men who had done this before and knew the system would believe them. When Evelyn cross-examined them, pointing out inconsistencies in their story, highlighting the lack of any attempt to verify his address, Judge Whitmore grew impatient. He sustained objections from the prosecution, interrupted Evelyn's line of questioning, and openly sighed as she presented evidence of the officer's prior complaints. The message was clear. The word of the police was gospel. The testimony of a Black defendant was inherently suspect. Marcus sat at the defense table, his hands clenched under the table. He watched the performance unfold, this theater of injustice. He saw the subtle smirk on the lead officer's face as the judge chastised his lawyer. He felt the sinking feeling that this was how it happened. This was how innocent lives were derailed. Not with dramatic, cartoonish evil, but with the quiet, casual, institutional bias of a judge who believed a badge was a halo and dark skin was a threat. The gavel was not an instrument of justice, it was a weapon, and it was about to come down on him. The final arguments were a study in contrast. The prosecution stood, chest puffed out, and spoke of the brave men in blue who risked their lives every day against unseen dangers. He talked about the difficult, split-second decisions they have to make, and how second-guessing those decisions from the comfort of a courtroom was a dangerous game. He didn't argue the facts, he argued emotion, allegiance, fear. Evelyn Reed argued the law. She was brilliant, methodical, and fierce. She dismantled the police report piece by piece. She highlighted the lack of evidence, the failure of procedure, the clear racial profiling that initiated the entire encounter. She spoke of property rights, of the Fourth Amendment, of the fundamental right of a man to be safe in his own home. She finished with a powerful, quiet statement. Your Honor, this isn't about second-guessing a split-second decision. This is about first-guessing a man based on the color of his skin. The decision to see a criminal where there was only a homeowner was made long before that rainy night. It was made in a culture of bias that this court has a duty to correct. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Whitmore adjusted his glasses, his face a mask of disdain. He didn't retire to his chambers to deliberate. He didn't need to. The verdict was written in the set of his jaw, in the cold look he directed at Marcus. The court has heard the testimony, he began, his voice dry and dismissive. And while I appreciate defense counsel's passionate arguments, this court finds the testimony of officers Miller and Dobbs to be credible and consistent with the standards of police work. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He could hear Evelyn inhale sharply beside him. The defendant, Whitmore continued, his eyes finally landing on Marcus, not with empathy, but with contempt, may very well be a successful individual. But success does not grant one immunity from complying with lawful orders. The officers observed suspicious behavior and were duty-bound to investigate. The defendant's decision to become confrontational and non-compliant is what escalated this situation, not any perceived bias on the part of the officers. He was blaming him. He was justifying it all. The humiliation, the violence, the arrest. Marcus's heart began to pound, not with fear now, but with a cold, clarifying fury. This case is a waste of this court's time, Whitmore declared, his voice rising. The motion to dismiss is denied. I find the defendant guilty on both charges. The court will now move to sentencing, Your Honor. The voice that cut through the courtroom was not loud. It was not shouted. But it carried a weight, an authority, a resonance that silenced the judge mid-sentence. It was the voice Marcus Thorne used in courtrooms when he addressed juries, when he cross-examined hostile witnesses. It was the voice of a United States attorney. All eyes turned to him. He slowly rose to his full height, smoothing his simple jacket. The transformation was instantaneous and electric. The slumped, defeated defendant was gone. In his place stood a man of immense power and authority. Judge Whitmore was startled, then annoyed. Mr. Thorne, you will sit down. Your counsel will speak for you. With all due respect, Your Honor, I believe I will speak for myself from here on out, Marcus said, his tone ice-cold and precise. He reached into his inner breast pocket, the same movement that had gotten him arrested. This time, however, he moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace. The officers in the gallery tensed instinctively, but they were frozen, confused by the shift in energy. From his pocket, he did not pull a weapon. He pulled a small, black leather wallet. He opened it and held it up high so that the judge, the prosecutors, and the two officers could see it clearly. Harold, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a familiar, almost conversational tone that was infinitely more terrifying than any shout. You've known me for 15 years. We've sat on bar association committees together. We've argued cases in the federal building across the street. Judge Whitmore squinted, his arrogance melting into confusion. He leaned forward, his eyes focusing on the gold badge and the identification card in the wallet. His face went pale. The blood drained from his features so completely he looked like a ghost. Marcus continued, his words falling like stones in the dead silence of the room. My name is Marcus Thorne. But in this capacity, I am the lead United States attorney for this district. The same district where your court resides. The same district where these officers Miller and Dobbs, submitted a false police report, committed perjury on your stand, and violated the civil rights of a private citizen. My civil rights, he let the wallet snap shut. The sound echoed in the room. The case I was preparing the night of this illegal arrest was * United States v. The Ridgefield Racketeering Syndicate Star. A case, I should add, that involves investigating public corruption and abuse of power within several municipal institutions. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air, thick and suffocating. He turned his gaze from the petrified judge to the two officers. Their smirks were gone, replaced by a dawning, horror-stricken realization. They hadn't just arrested a black man. They had arrested a federal prosecutor. They had handcuffed and processed a man who had the power, the resources, and the motive to dismantle their entire careers, and perhaps their freedom. Marcus turned back to the judge, who was now gripping his bench as if for support. So, before you proceed with sentencing, Your Honor, Marcus said, loading the title with more contempt than Whitmore had ever mustered, I suggest you take a very long recess. You will need to consult with your own legal counsel. Because the next time I am in a courtroom, it will not be as a defendant. It will be at the prosecution's table. And the people in this room, all of you who so eagerly participated in this miscarriage of justice, will be the ones standing trial. The silence that followed was absolute. The gavel had fallen, but it was Marcus who had delivered the final, shattering blow. The aftermath was not a single event, but a seismic shockwave that radiated out from that courtroom, cracking the foundations of a corrupt system. Judge Whitmore, utterly humiliated and facing a judicial conduct review and a potential federal investigation, immediately declared a mistrial and recused himself from the case. His reputation, built over decades, was irreparably shattered in a single moment. The video of Marcus's revelation, captured by a spectator's phone, went viral. It wasn't just a story, it was a perfect, horrifying metaphor for systemic racism. It showed that even a man in a position of power was not immune to the bias woven into the fabric of society, but it also showed that with that power, he could fight back. The two officers were suspended pending a full federal investigation, led by Marcus's own office. Given his clear conflict of interest, Marcus handed the reins to a special prosecutor from the Department of Justice, but he ensured it was someone known for their integrity and ruthlessness. The investigation didn't stop with the false arrest. It expanded, uncovering a pattern of behavior, coerced confessions, and a culture of impunity within their precinct. Their badges were revoked. Criminal charges for perjury, falsifying reports, and civil rights violations followed. They became symbols not of heroism, but of accountability, but for Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. He had won using a power that few possess. He had wielded his title like a shield and a sword. He returned to his beautiful home, but the porch light was now always bright, a permanent beacon that felt more like a warning than a welcome. The sanctuary had been violated, and the memory of that night, of the cold handcuffs, of the contempt in the judge's eyes, would never fully leave him. He sat in his study one evening, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He looked at the photos on his wall, his graduation, his swearing-in ceremony, his family. He had climbed the highest mountains, achieved what so many were told was impossible. And yet, on a rainy Tuesday, none of it mattered. The suit, the title, the accomplishments, they were all invisible, stripped away by the one thing that was always hypervisible, his skin. His thoughts turned to the millions of black and brown people who faced the same bias, the same injustice, every single day. The fathers giving their sons the talk. The mothers praying for their children's safe return from a drive to the store. The men and women who are followed in shops, stopped on the street, pulled over for driving while black. What was their power? They didn't have a federal badge to flash. They didn't have a team of lawyers on retainer. Their truth was often silenced by a gavel, buried under paperwork, or lost in a system that refused to see them. His victory was personal, but the war was far from over. He had used the system's own weapons against it, but the system itself remained, largely unchanged for those without his specific, rare arsenal. He became a different kind of prosecutor. He established a new civil rights division within his office, dedicated solely to investigating police misconduct and racial profiling. He used his platform to speak truth to power, not from a place of theory, but from the searing experience of a victim. He became a beacon of hope, but a realistic one, a man who knew the depth of the problem because he had been trapped at the very bottom of the well. The story of Marcus Thorne is a satisfying fantasy of comeuppance. It's the justice we all crave to see in a world that so often denies it. But it is also a warning. A stark, uncomfortable question hangs in the air long after the headlines fade. If a United States attorney can be broken down to nothing but his skin color, handcuffed on his own doorstep, and presumed guilty in a court of law, what hope is there for anyone else? The real tragedy is not that it happened to him. The real tragedy is that it happens every day to people without his power, and their stories are never told, their revelations never come, and the gavel always falls against them. His story is the exception that proves the rule, a rule of injustice that we must all, every single one of us, work to rewrite. The question is no longer what Marcus Thorne did when he revealed who he was. The question is, what will we do to create a world where no one needs a badge to prove their humanity?